The range police barely finished shouting before she vanished behind the basalt like a shadow that didn't belong to daylight. Mara hugged the cooling rock, feeling the last color bleed from the sky as dusk settled across the restricted training sector. Wind from the east pushed sand across her boots, carrying faint tremors from distant artillery. She had crossed 100 dead ranges in her life, but this one watched her back with sensors she could almost feel humming beneath the dust. Before we begin this mission, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because some stories of courage never made the headlines, but they deserve to be heard. Tell us where you're watching from and who's the hero in your family. 2 uniformed officers skirted the ridge below, scanning with carbines angled low. "Ma'am, this is restricted. You need to head back to the access road." Their voices carried more annoyance than threat. She didn't respond. It wasn't defiance. It was instinct. Stillness first. Calculation next. A convoy engine grumbled from the access track, followed by the heavy steps of someone who didn't bother hiding authority. Colonel Rourke Hale, HAWK-6, she remembered him from years ago, though she doubted he knew she'd survived the last mission he'd read her name on. He climbed the incline with the slow, steady pace of a man who measured the land as much as the person standing on it. "Mara Vale," he said quietly, almost to himself. Or should I say Viper? She stiffened, though she didn't turn. That call sign had no business echoing across this range. Not anymore. She forced herself to meet his eyes. He wasn't smiling. He was studying her stance, her balance, the way her fingers hovered near her pack straps. Recognition there was not fondness. Before she could speak, a harsh alarm rippled across the valley. A red strobe pulsed at the cum tower near Ridge 22. The ground seemed to tighten. A second alarm followed, lower, more urgent. She felt Hale's posture shift even before control came across the radio. "Control, all stations. We have a breach on North Wash, multiple hits moving southwest, possible armed personnel." Hale didn't need more. He pivoted, shouting for the range police to secure the road. Mara watched the officers rush off, adrenaline suddenly greater than their irritation. The colonel looked back at her, searching her face as if confirming something he'd pieced together long ago. "You saw the direction," he said. "I heard their boots," she replied. "North Wash, light step, 2 up front, 1 dragging behind, spacing's off. They're not trained for open ground militia," he asked, "or scouts testing the perimeter." RAVEN, to cut in over radio before Hale could answer. "Sir, this is Nolan. We're moving from the motor pool now. Request." Confirmation of rules of contact. Non-lethal, unless fired upon, Hale said, then lowered his voice. "They won't respect that." Mara felt the conflict rising inside her, like old smoke. She'd planned to skirt the range, disappear into the canyon network, stay out of the military's orbit forever. But breaches at this hour weren't random. If untrained militia scouts got past canyon mouth, the training units bivouacked near the southern plateau would be exposed. Hale seemed to read every hesitation in her expression. "You know this terrain better than my entire QRT," he said. "You walked it before anyone mapped it. That was a long time ago. Doesn't change the truth." Another radio burst crackled overhead. EYE7 reporting thermal pushes 3, maybe 4 moving through scrub pockets west of Ridge 22. Low discipline, loose spacing, might be more. Nolan's voice followed immediately. Raven 2 on site. No visual yet. Wind is killing acoustics. Mara looked toward the north. The wind was steady at 7 knots, enough to drag off sound and render pursuit by ear nearly useless. lest you knew how the canyon bends returned echoes after dusk. She exhaled slowly, then turned back to Hale. You don't want a civilian on your operation, she said. No, he admitted, but I need Viper. She closed her eyes for a brief second. That name was a weight she'd buried deep, but the colonel's tone wasn't reverent. It was practical. He wasn't trying to resurrect a ghost. He was trying to save his people. Fine, she said. I'll take point. Nolan arrived at a jog, gear rattling against his vest. He skidded to a stop when he saw Mara standing beside Hale. Confusion hardened into irritation. Sir, why is she still here? She's assisting us, Hale said. Nolan frowned. Assisting? With respect, Colonel, she's not cleared. We don't know you know enough, Mara cut in. Your team is walking into a bowl. North Wash curves right before Delta 3. Anyone crossing tonight will try to skirt the ridge shadows. They'll use the basalt shelves for cover. Take the wrong line, and you'll expose your flank. Nolan stared at her, skeptical, but weighing her words. How do you know that? She pointed to the dust at his boots. You came in heavy from the motor pool. 10 minutes ago, the wind was lighter. Your tracks held their shape, but the ones under Ridge 22, they're shallower, fresher. Someone else cut across here right before you arrived. He looked down, surprised he hadn't noticed first. Hale nodded toward the darkness ahead. Let her lead. That's an order. Nolan hesitated, then signaled his team forward. Fine, but if she makes one wrong call, I won't, Mara said. She moved ahead, letting memory guide her feet. The canyon breathed differently at this hour. Shadows opened like old scars. 12 strides to the first shale patch, then a shallow dip where the wind gathered in a thin whistle. She read the land like a map you didn't need to unfold. Control, this is HAWK6. We're advancing toward Delta 3. Any update on thermal? Negative, HAWK6. I-7 reports intermittent silhouettes but shifting. Could be decoys. Mara slowed, raising one hand. Nolan nearly collided with her. She pointed to a cluster of rocks positioned too deliberately near the canyon mouth entrance. Someone knelt here, she whispered. Left knee, right foot braced out, watching the approach. They're testing response time. How far ahead? Nolan asked. Less than 3 minutes. Maybe less. She scanned the ridge. If they're planning something bigger, this is just their feeler. Nolan looked at her, the first flicker of respect shaping his expression. You really used to run ops out here. Not anymore, she said quietly. Tonight is an exception. They pushed forward another 50 meters. The ridgeline compressed overhead, turning the path into a narrow funnel. Mara crouched, feeling the dust. The tracks were fresher now, sharper edges where weight had shifted in a hurry. They picked up speed, she murmured. They spotted something, or someone. Raven 2, Hale said over the radio. Hold position until Viper clears your line. Nolan blinked. Viper? Hale's voice stayed calm. She's earned the call sign tonight. Nolan didn't argue. Not this time. Mara scanned the bend ahead. She felt the shift in the wind, the faint thump of artillery miles off, the subtle change in the air pressure that always preceded a human presence. Her pulse stayed level, but her mind edged back toward the person she once was. The one who could track a shadow across a moonless field. She didn't want to be that version of herself again. But if she walked away now, the militia scouts would slip through the gap and vanish into the canyon network. People would die. She touched the basalt wall, grounding herself. They're close, she said, and the moment we see them, they'll know we're here. Nolan tightened his grip on his carbine. Then what? Then, she said, stepping into the narrowing path, We make sure they don't reach the canyon." And as they moved deeper into Delta 3, Mara felt the old instincts rising, sharp and undeniable, signaling that this night was only the beginning of something far more dangerous waiting beyond the next ridge. Night rose fast over the canyon, and with it came the part of Mara she thought she'd buried years ago. The last smear of dusk retreated behind Ridge 22, leaving the slot canyon steeped in a hard blue shadow that felt older than the range itself. She moved first, boots quiet on the shale, counting the minutes since 2020 hours without needing to check her watch. Nolan's team followed in a staggered line, their carbines angled low. Infrared strobes muted against the walls that squeezed them into a 40-meter ribbon of visibility. She could hear their breathing shift whenever the canyon narrowed, but no one said it aloud. Not yet. Nolan watched her shoulders more than her face. He'd hated taking point from a civilian an hour earlier, but here, among the twisting rock and blind corners, he seemed to accept it like a reluctant truth. He carried a DMR slung across his chest, finger near the safety, waiting for a threat they all felt but could not yet name. "Raven 2, he whispered once, as though reminding himself who he was. Mara didn't turn. She already knew. Control was a faint pulse in their earpieces, Tess's voice steady. "Control the Raven element. Thermals show movement in Delta 3. Possible split groups." Her words clipped off, canyon echo folding the sound into something thinner. Mara raised a hand, halting the team. The wind shifted east at 7 knots, brushing cold across her cheek. She crouched and touched the ground, feeling for what the darkness hid. There 2 tracks crossing the wash. Weight forward, stride compressed. Men moving fast, heavier gear. And one more beside them, lighter and deliberate, footfall angled to the wall. A scout. She didn't say it aloud. She only stood and walked toward the cairn, stacked neatly against a shale shelf. It shouldn't have been neat. It shouldn't have been here. She knelt again, sliding the red-lensed penlight from her pocket, shielding the glow with her hand. The beam caught a seam where stone met polymer wear. Someone had disguised a signal booster beneath 2 small rocks. The device blinked once, faint, almost invisible. Her breath stopped. Nolan saw it a heartbeat later. "That's not ours." "No," she said, "it's theirs. And it means they're not lost. They're coordinating teams." She swept her thumb lightly across the dust on its edge. "This is an infiltration map point." "Raven 2, confirm object." Hale's voice cut through, as HAWK6, the tone tight enough to bend steel. "Higher wants status." Mara could imagine him back at the command trailer, hands braced on the table, eyes fixed on the map they'd all assumed was secure. "It's a booster," Nolan answered. "Not improvised, purpose-built." He hesitated only a second before adding, "Mara found it." Silence from Hale followed, long enough to weigh something heavy. "Copy. Keep her on point." The path tightened again, walls pressing like ribs around them. The moonlight reflected off the shale in silver shards, throwing thin spears of light ahead. Mara counted her strides 40-80, 110 mapping distance the old way, because electronics meant nothing when the enemy understood how to bend them. The canyon's echoes filtered every step differently, deeper to the right, hollow to the left. Someone ahead was moving, adjusting gear. Metallic clicks carried lightly across stone. They slowed. The team's tension sharpened, breath turning shallow. A single rotor hum drifted overhead. Harbor's drone, tracing a line above Ridge 22 Harbor. "Strobe check," Nolan murmured. "I-7, strobe good, hovering. Feed is clean, but clean didn't last." At the midpoint of the canyon, where the walls widened just enough to give a false sense of safety, the rotor hum dimmed. A flicker of static hissed in the combs. Then the feed collapsed. I-7 to Raven, IMLOS static, swallowed the rest. Harbor's voice returned, fractured, lost feed, signal severed. Possible jammer, then nothing at all. The spy stayed empty. Nolan cursed under his breath. Break control. We've lost drone eyes. Control acknowledged. Confirm jamming source. Her voice shook just enough to betray that this was worse than any simulation. Mara closed her eyes for a short second. Triangulated positions, booster placement, scout patterns, the canyon's narrow throat. They built a kill zone, she said. 3 teams, 1 above, 2 behind the curve of the wall. They want us to walk into the center so they can close angles. Nolan stared at her as if seeing something dangerous but needed. How do you know that? Because she'd used the same pattern years ago. Because ghosts didn't forget. But she only answered, because that's what I'd do. Raven 2, move, Hale ordered, pressure edging his voice. If they have a tech crew, you don't have time. Not forward, Mara said. Side splice. Nolan frowned. There's no side path here. There is if you scrape for it. She moved to the right wall and pressed her palm to it. The echo told her everything. The hollow pocket on the far side, the shelf beyond. There's a shelf 12 meters up, narrow, but it leads to a bend above their left team. You're guessing, Nolan said. No, she replied. I'm remembering. He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Raven element, follow her lead. They climbed in controlled silence, boots sliding over shale, fingers searching for seams in the stone. Above them, faint silhouettes moved where the militia had taken positions. Mara felt the old instinct rise, sharpening her breath, honing every step. This was the part of her she'd sworn to bury, and it slipped on like a familiar glove. At the top, she crouched low and peered through a crack in the ridge wall, 3 figures below, adjusting their optics. One held a jammer pack, antenna angled down the canyon. Another watched the choke point. The third scanned with a cheap thermal scope, unaware that their trap had already begun to fray. Nolan settled beside her, eyes widening as he finally understood what she'd predicted. We can break their left angle from here, he whispered. We can do more, she said. We can collapse the whole triangle. Controlled to Raven element, HAWK6, requests status. Hostiles are moving. Nolan answered softly. We're repositioned. Mara saw the angle before we walked in blind. Again, that weighted pause from Hail Raven 2. Hold your course. Natural lead is Viper. She didn't breathe for a moment. She hadn't heard that call sign in years. Below, one of the militia shifted, listening to something only he could hear. Time was collapsing. The team waited for Nolan. Nolan waited for her. Mara studied the position and felt something steadier than fear settle into her bones. We take their tech first, she said. Then the rest folds, and as the canyon darkened further, she realized the night was no longer rising against Hurt, was rising with her. The real reckoning waited beyond the next ridge. The canyon floor shimmered with hostile strobes, and Mara knew the final choice would be hers alone. She moved along the narrow ledge, body low against the shale, measuring each foothold as if the rocks themselves whispered secrets. The militia's command element lay below, armored in shadows and cheap thermal scopes, preparing to activate a long-range burst transmission that could cascade chaos through the southern plateau. Mara's eyes scanned the angles, memorizing every gap, every ridge, every place a single misstep could cost lives. Nolan's team crouched 20 meters behind her, pinned in the deeper canyon throat. RAVEN2's fingers hovered near triggers, muscles taut, waiting for a signal they didn't yet have. Hale, HAWK-6, maintained overwatch from the ridge crest, voice tight in the come. Control's updates came sporadically, Tessa straining to parse thermal echoes. HAWK-6, multiple contacts moving. Relay near comms node, she said, terse and exact. Mara's breath stayed calm, but her mind raced in old rhythms she had fought to forget. Years of silence, of running ghosts across desert ridges, were distilled into every careful step. The ledge narrowed further, 25 meters above the command team, forcing a high-risk flank crawl. She shifted, the underbarrel IR laser tracing the edges of the ridge, keeping sight of the relay's blinking capacitor. One slip, one noise, and Nolan's team could be hit before they had a chance to respond. Below, the militia commander adjusted his headset, unaware that their trap had already been circled. Mara noted the subtle weight shift, the glint of a thermal lens, the placement of their comms pack against a rock cairn. Calculations played out in her mind: drop 60 meters to the relay point, disable it, and retreat without signaling her presence. Simple in theory, impossible in execution. She slid over the ridge, silent and deliberate, fingers tracing hidden grips in shadow. The relay's capacitor glowed faintly. Mara dropped behind it, severing wires as sparks flared. Suppressive fire erupted. The canyon became a staccato of muzzle flashes. RAVEN, 2 shouted commands she ignored, moving by instinct along the ridge, 30 meters to flank the node. The militia commander froze. Recognition flickering Night Viper, he lunged. She sidestepped, cutting the last connector. They collided in close quarters, NVG flickering over bodies and rifles. Minutes later, he fell back, disoriented. Mara exhaled. The relay was dead, the threat neutralized. She would stay no longer a ghost. Nolan nodded, the respect in his eyes now undeniable. Hale allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale, the kind reserved for moments when a legend aligns with reality. Mara looked back toward the ridge they had defended, toward the team she had led, and knew that while the night had demanded everything, it had also given her a choice, a new beginning. As the first light crept across Sector Delta 3, Mara stepped forward, leaving behind the shadows of the canyon and moving into the role she had chosen for herself. The battle was over, but the path she now walked would redefine everything.